Imagine for a second just being thrown out of a helicopter into an uncharted prehistoric jungle.
Oh, that sounds terrifying.
Right. And you aren't given a clear objective at all. You aren't given a path to follow. You are just handed, like a compass, a completely blank piece of paper, and a single instruction survive.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that blank piece of paper wasn't just a metaphor. I mean, it was a physical component of the game.
Exactly. Back in January of 1981, a simple 32-page booklet did exactly that to millions of tabletop gamers. We are looking at a massive stack of sources today. Archival retrospectives, design manifestos, historical critiques.
Lots of really dense material.
Yeah, and it's all centering on one remarkably unassuming document, which is the Dungeons & Dragons module X1, the Isle of Dread. So, welcome to the table. Our mission in this deep dive is to explore how this single publication permanently shifted interactive storytelling. Taking from those claustrophobic subterranean corridors out into the blinding, hostile sunlight of the open world.
It was a massive leap.
It really was. We're going to look at what its legacy teaches you about freedom, psychology, and game design today. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because a mere instructional toolkit somehow managed to launch the entire open-world concept decades before modern video games made it an industry standard.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, in early 1981, Dungeons & Dragons was actually facing a fundamental mechanical crisis.
Like crisis.
Yeah, the game's entire architecture up to that point had been built around dungeon crawls. So these were enclosed subterranean spaces.
Right, like you kick down a door, defeat a monster in a 10 by 10 stone room, grab the treasure, and just move to the next room.
Exactly. And that localized linear design was incredible for teaching new players the basic mechanics, combat and resource management. But the problem was, players were surviving.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, their characters were gaining significant power, accumulating wealth, even attracting followers under the newly minted expert set, which codified rules for character levels 4 through 14.
Right, because a wizard capable of altering reality, or a fighter commanding a small mercenary army, they really shouldn't be squeezing single file down a damp hallway fighting giant rats.
No, absolutely not.
They had fundamentally outgrown the dungeon.
Exactly. And TSR, the company behind the game, recognized this bottleneck. So they commissioned designers David Zeb Cook and Tom Moldvay to build a didactic tool to fix it.
Right.
X1 wasn't just a new map for players to plunder. I mean, it was an entirely new modality of play. It was a manifesto explicitly written to teach dungeon masters how to transition from micromanaging a few underground rooms to, well, macro-managing an entire living, breathing world.
And the way they execute this paradigm shift is just incredibly bold because they refuse to hold your hand.
Yeah, they really throw you to the wolves.
They do. They don't give you a sprawling, heavy-handed narrative with a villain monologuing about taking over the world. The setup is deliberately minimalist.
Super minimalist.
The players simply find a bundle of mundane, non-magical parchment sheets hidden in a normal treasure hoard. And among them is a fragmented ship's log from a legendary captain named Rory Barbarossa, along with a rough, incomplete maritime map.
Right, and the log points them hundreds of miles south, across the treacherous Sea of Dread to the remote Thanigioth archipelago.
Such a great name.
It is. And Barbarossa's final entry mentions an overgrown ruin, a once mighty civilization, and whispers of a legendary great black pearl of the gods.
And that is your entire hook. Just buy a boat, hire a crew, survive the ocean voyage, and see what's on this massive landmass.
Good luck, basically.
Right. And when you finally hit the beach, that is when the true paradigm shift happens. Because the old dungeon crawl was like riding a haunted house attraction at a theme park.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, you can look around, but you can only go where the track takes you. The Isle of Dread ripped up the tracks entirely.
Completely. And this is where that blank piece of paper comes in. The module actually included a tear-out sheet for the players. It featured nothing but the jagged coastal outline of the island, overlaid with a blank hexagonal grid.
Just a grid.
Just a grid. The Dungeon Master had the completed map with all the secrets, but the players had absolutely nothing. As they physically moved their characters through the wilderness, they had to map the interior terrain themselves, hex by hex.
They had to earn every single inch of that map.
They really did, and this was the codification of the hex crawl mechanic.
Right.
Before X1, wilderness travel in role-playing games was generally handled through a narrative montage. A game master might just say, well, you travel for 3 days through the forest, maybe rolling a few dice for a random bandit attack before you arrived at the real dungeon.
Yeah, just snip into the good part.
Exactly. But Cook and Moldvay turned the wilderness itself into the primary theater of play. The hex crawl integrated rigorous mathematical mechanics.
How so?
Well, moving through a dense mangrove swamp carried severe terrain penalties compared to walking across an open coastal plain. It would take exponentially longer, draining your supplies faster.
So you are forced to deal with the logistics of survival.
Yes, heavily.
Which means the true villain of this story isn't a dark lord in an obsidian tower. The villain is the environment itself.
Absolutely.
You're calculating dwindling rations. You're facing the threat of tropical diseases and unpredictable weather systems. The module explicitly instructs the dungeon master to constantly describe the oppressive, humid heat, the cacophony of unseen jungle fauna, the pervasive smells of decay and exotic flora.
Yeah, and that environmental hostility completely changed the underlying logic of wandering monsters.
Oh, right, because in a dungeon, a random encounter table might just throw a gelatinous cube at you to drain your hit points.
Exactly. But in X1, the random encounter tables were meticulously tailored to specific ecological regions. The predators hunting on the beaches were entirely different from the threats in the deep jungle or the central volcanic plateau.
That makes so much sense.
It does. Furthermore, the design explicitly instructed the DM not to act like a mindless computer, simply executing a dice roll.
Right, they introduced the concept of cinematic signaling.
Yes.
Which is so cool. Instead of just rolling a die and announcing an Allosaurus jumps out of the bushes, roll for initiative, the module suggests building the terror organically.
Yeah, give them some warning.
Like, you might first hear the terrifying crashing of massive ancient trees snapping in the distance. Or the party might stumble upon fresh, gigantic tracks filling with rainwater in the mud.
It elevated random encounters from arbitrary resource drains to atmospheric world-building tools.
Yeah.
You are simulating a robust ecology, teaching players that they are at the bottom of the food chain in a living ecosystem.
And that ecosystem is a massive departure from what players were used to. Because when you start mapping this island, you realize it completely shatters the classic Tolkien-esque medieval fantasy tropes.
Oh, completely.
No knights in shining armor and pristine castles here. X1 actually kicked off Tom Moldvay's unofficial pulp fantasy trilogy. They were heavily channeling early 20th century speculative fiction. We see the DNA of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, and a massive literal nod to the 1933 King Kong film with a monolithic stone wall violently dividing the island.
And what's fascinating here is how nuanced the sociology of the island is, despite those pulpy roots. I mean, it's not just a dinosaur shooting gallery.
Right.
You have complex indigenous societies living near the coastal wall. The village of Tangaroa operates as a matriarchal society where political power and lineage trace exclusively through the female line.
Which is huge for the time.
Massive. That single design choice immediately upends the patriarchal power dynamics players automatically expected from standard European medieval fantasy.
Yeah, and I was reading through the anthropological notes in these retrospectives, and there's a detail about necromancy that it broke my brain.
Oh, the zombies.
Yes. Because usually a zombie in these games is a monster you kill on sight, right? It's inherently evil. But I saw a note in the text about the native tribes actively reanimating their own dead, and it wasn't for dark magic at all.
Right, the zombie laborers. The native tribes reanimate their ancestors out of sheer pragmatism. They use them as a highly efficient agricultural labor force.
That is wild.
It is. The zombies work the fields, harvest crops, or act as an expendable militia in times of severe crisis. It's a brilliant anthropological twist. It forces players to pause and view the undead as a cultural and economic artifact rather than just an automatic combat trigger.
It totally flips the script on what evil looks like. But while we're on the subject of confronting things that break your brain, we have to talk about the Kopru.
Oh boy, the Kopru.
Yeah, because once you penetrate the deepest part of the jungle, you find a massive central volcanic plateau containing a crater lake. And the center of that lake is Taboo Island, featuring these submerged, claustrophobic temple ruins.
Very creepy setting.
And that is where you find the apex threat. The Kopru are these ancient, subterranean, amphibious, salamander-like beings, and they have this potent, inescapable mind control mechanic.
Yeah, they serve as the ideological climax of the island. David Cook explicitly modeled them after the tyrannical reptilian masters from Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar series.
Okay, but I have to throw a red flag on this mechanic.
Go for it.
The Koprus use this mind control to literally turn the player characters against each other. They dominate your mind and force you to attack your friend.
Yes, they do.
Doesn't forcing player versus player combat fundamentally violate the cooperative social contract of a tabletop game?
It's definitely risky.
Right. I mean, you invite friends over, order pizza, sit around a table to slay monsters together, and suddenly the game strips away your autonomy and forces you to murder your friend's character. People will just flip the table and leave. It feels like terrible, antagonistic game design.
Well, stripping player agency is incredibly dangerous, and today many modern designers would completely agree with you. It severely disrupts the standard social contract.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to view this through the lens of early 1980s psychological horror. Up to this point in D&D, antagonists were straightforward, physical obstacles. Goblins, giants, dragons. You swing a sword at them until their numbers reach 0.
Right. Very simple.
The Koprus were designed to abruptly, violently shift the tone from a sun-drenched, open-air dinosaur hunt to paranoid, claustrophobic terror.
So wait, it's like John Carpenter's The Thing.
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play. The open-world freedom you just spent weeks enjoying is suddenly inverted into intense physical claustrophobia inside these submerged ruins.
Oh, wow.
The environment strips away your physical safety, and then the Koprus strip away your autonomy. You are suddenly forced to fear your own allies. You aren't just managing your hit points anymore, you are managing your trust.
That is terrifying.
In 1981, realizing the player sitting next to you might secretly be controlled by an amphibious monster was a revolutionary type of fear.
Okay, when you put it like that, that trap really toys with your mind rather than your character sheet.
Exactly.
But that sense of psychological warfare wasn't just limited to the dungeon. It was literally bleeding over from the real-world office politics happening at TSR in 1981.
Oh, the office drama.
Yes.
The tension of Taboo Island was shaped by the humor and, honestly, the sheer spite of the designers themselves. They immortalized their inside office jokes right onto the map.
The geography of Taboo Island is practically an architectural map of PSR's internal disputes.
It's so funny. The names of the native settlements are all thinly veiled Easter eggs. Like Tangaroa, the main village, is a portmanteau of Tom and Zeb, which was David Cook's nickname.
Right.
Another village, Karakau, is an anagram of Caillou, Cook's wife. And Usamani was named after Cook's pet cat. But my absolute favorite part is how they weaponize the temple rooms to mock their coworkers.
It's incredibly petty in the best way. It really is. Harold Johnson was a developer at TSR who often acted as the internal censor. He was the guy telling the writers what was too mature or edgy to publish.
Right. And in retaliation, Cook and Moldvay dedicated Room 32 of the Taboo Island Temple to him, explicitly naming it the Room of the Great Obscenity.
I love that. And then there's Lawrence Schick, another prominent designer. He was infamous in the office for keeping a vast, highly potent collection of perfume and fragrance oils on his desk.
Yeah, apparently Cook found the smell completely cloying and unavoidable.
So Room 24 of the ancient evil temple was officially christened the Room of the Vile Odors.
It really highlights the punk rock DIY ethos of game design in the early 80s. I mean, these were young creatives building an industry from scratch. But alongside the interpersonal humor, you see absolute mechanical mastery in how they designed threats.
Like what?
Well, look at the trap Cook designed in Room 7 of that same temple. It's a weakened stone floor suspended over a flooded chamber. The text specifies it's rotted by decades of dripping water and slimes, but it is meticulously engineered around weight displacement.
Oh, right. It safely supports the weight of a single character crossing it. But the combined weight of two characters instantly collapses the masonry.
And falling into the water-filled room below causes absolutely zero falling damage.
Wait, none?
None. Cook didn't build that trap to kill characters through numerical attrition or a sudden barrage of spikes. He engineered it purely to induce panic, physically separate the party, and plunge them into an unknown, dark, aquatic environment where they know amphibious monsters are lurking.
That is so evil.
It is. Again, it's psychological tension prioritized over hit point depletion.
It's incredibly smart design. But sadly, the tone of the company history shifts drastically when you look at the corporate reality of that year. Right after this module was published to immense critical and commercial success, TSR upper management initiated a period that historians refer to as the TSR purge.
Yeah, and it remains a very dark chapter for the artistic history of the hobby.
Yeah.
The company was experiencing explosive, unprecedented financial growth. Paradoxically, much of this was fueled by the Satanic Panic. Mainstream media outlets and concerned parent groups were actively accusing the game of promoting occultism and devil worship.
which basically acted as massive, unavoidable free marketing. I mean, you go on national television and tell millions of rebellious teenagers that a book is dangerous and forbidden, they're going to sprint to the hobby shop to buy it. TSR is making millions.
Exactly. But the influx of cash led to rapid corporate restructuring, and internal politics became incredibly volatile. In April of 1981, management initiated massive layoffs aimed at specific creative factions within the company.
Just gutting the staff.
Pretty much. Brilliant artists and developers like Paul Reich, Bill Willingham, and Jeff Dee were either abruptly terminated or resigned in vocal protest. The surrealist artist Errol Otis, whose distinct style defined the era, left shortly after.
And the real tragedy for you and me, looking back at this history, is the physical art itself. TSR had a strict corporate policy at the time of retaining absolute ownership of all physical original artwork.
Right.
They didn't just buy the reproduction rights. They kept the actual canvas boards and paintings in their warehouses. They refused to return them to the artists.
And decades later, when art historians and the original artists themselves tried to locate those paintings to preserve them or display them in galleries, they discovered the archives were essentially empty.
Unbelievable.
Because of that corporate policy, much of the original art, including Jeff Dee's striking, vibrant cover painting for X1 and the iconic monochromatic blue maps that felt like naval blueprints, had been completely lost. They were misplaced in corporate moves or outright destroyed by the company over the years.
It's a massive, devastating loss of cultural heritage for the medium. I mean, all we have left are the printed, mass-produced modules themselves.
It really is a shame.
But, while the physical art was lost to corporate mismanagement, the structural DNA of the Isle of Dread survived. It proved to be immortal. Which brings us to the modern era, and the intense debates this module continues to spark among designers today, particularly regarding how technology has fundamentally changed human cognition during play.
Yeah, this raises an important question about the death of the physical player mapper. We talked about the blank hex grid Cook and Moldvay provided. In 1981, the players had to physically draw the lines, calculate hex distances with a pencil, erase mistakes, and actively argue over which direction was north.
Right.
Today, we play heavily on digital virtual tabletops, or VTTs.
Yeah, where a digital token moves across the screen and an algorithm automatically clears away the fog of war, instantly revealing a highly detailed pre-rendered map.
The computer handles all the spatial math, but we have to ask, by automating that exploration process, do modern players lose the deep spatial anxiety and the physical neurological engagement that define the original Isle of Dread?
That's a great point.
When you hold a pencil and draw a hexagon, your brain is actively engaged in spatial reasoning. You are synthesizing descriptions into a geographic reality. When an algorithm reveals the map for you, your brain shifts into a passive state. You are consuming a map, not creating one.
Right.
Manual mapping wasn't just administrative bookkeeping. It was a core cognitive mechanic of the immersion. If the computer is doing the crawling for you, can a true hex crawl even exist?
So what does this all mean for modern adventure design? Because when you look at highly acclaimed modern successors to X1, like the massive 5th edition adventure Tomb of Annihilation, you see a fascinating philosophical split.
Very much so.
Tomb draws heavy, undeniable inspiration from X1. It's a massive, dinosaur-infested, jungle-based hex crawl. But modern game design almost always injects a ticking clock narrative.
Right.
In Tomb of Annihilation, there's a global death curse slowly killing off the population of the world. Every day you spend wandering in the jungle, the curse gets worse.
It's known as the sandbox paradox. Designers constantly debate this. Does imposing a strict narrative deadline enhance the tension of a wilderness survival game, or does it fundamentally destroy the appeal of the hex crawl by punishing players for taking the time to explore?
I firmly believe the ticking clock punishes exploration. I mean, in X1, there is zero artificial urgency.
None at all.
The island is dotted with incredibly rich, self-contained locales that exist entirely independently of the player's goals. You can stumble across a hidden pirate lair. You might find a village of sentient, magical, shape-shifting spiders called Arania.
Which is awesome.
Right. You could discover a forest of ancient treants or run into a nomadic race of feline humanoids riding saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah.
If you have a ticking clock telling you the world is ending, you are heavily incentivized to rush past all of that brilliant world building.
You don't have time to stop and look around.
Exactly. X1's complete lack of urgency makes it a vastly superior, purer sandbox. Your drive to move into the next hex is based entirely on your own organic curiosity, not external narrative coercion.
And because of that, it functioned as a persistent, evolving mini-campaign setting. In fact, its world building was so expansive that it accidentally birthed an entire universe.
Really?
Yeah. The 24-mile per hex continental map included in the back pages of X1 provided the very first geographical placements for sweeping nations like the Republic of Darakin, the Principalities of Glantry, the Emirates of Yalarom, and the Empire of Thyatis.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize
Yeah.
that.
A 32-page booklet laid the foundational bedrock for the massive Mystara campaign setting that would go on to dominate the next entire decade of TSR publications.
It taught an entire generation how to balance gritty, logistical survival with emergent, player-driven storytelling. And that brings the legacy of the Isle of Dread right back to you, listening to this deep dive right now.
Always back to the real world.
Always. Because the psychology of the unknown is universal. Whether you are prepping to navigate a complex corporate restructuring, trying to manage a massive, poorly defined tech project, or just dealing with the sheer overwhelming amount of unstructured information we face every day, the core cognitive lesson of X1 applies.
Definitely.
The best way to conquer an overwhelming, hostile unknown isn't to freeze up waiting for someone to hand you a pre-written set of instructions or a completed track to follow. The best way to handle it is to take a blank sheet of paper, step into the jungle, and start drawing the map yourself, one hex at a time.
It's about seizing agency in an unmapped space. Cook and Moldvay successfully married the gritty, survivalist tension of early pulp fiction with rigorous mathematical game mechanics.
Yeah, they really did.
In doing so, they showed millions of people that the world outside the dungeon is vast, complex, lethal, and desperately waiting for someone brave enough to explore it.
But I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over. Because X1 is so deeply beloved by the tabletop community, subsequent owners of the D&D intellectual property have continually sought to integrate the island into their own distinct worlds.
Right, it pops up everywhere.
It really does. Over the decades, the Isle of Dread was canonically rewritten as a nomadic, plane-shifting entity. In 2004, it materialized in the world of Greyhawk for the Savage Tide adventure path. Later, it was established as a highly unstable domain floating through the magical Feywild. In 5th edition, the entire landmass was relocated to the elemental plane of water.
It just keeps moving.
Yeah. Isn't it beautifully, perfectly poetic that a manual explicitly designed to teach people how to permanently map a fixed, logical, geographical location ultimately became a restless, unmoored phantom that refuses to be tied down to any single reality? Perhaps true sandbox freedom means never allowing your map to be fully finished.